My Neighbor's a Cannibal, the twisted case of Jason Foreman's murder. May 18, 1975. A quiet evening in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, turned into a nightmare. 5-year-old Jason Foreman stepped outside to play and never came home. The horror, he was right there, blending into the community, unnoticed. In 1982, the truth surfaced, and it was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. 16-year-old Michael Woodmansee, a quiet neighbor, had done something unspeakable. The crime wasn't just murder, it was something far darker. The details police uncovered shook even the most seasoned investigators. And the worst part, he had lived among them all along, hiding in plain sight. How could a teenager commit such a crime? What happened inside his home? And why did he walk free after serving only part of his sentence? This is the case of Jason Foreman, a story of horror, betrayal, and a failed justice system. Let's uncover the truth. The Foreman family had built a life in South Kingstown, Rhode Island, that many would envy. They were a loving couple with 3 beautiful children and lived in a peaceful neighborhood where children could play freely without fear. The town felt safe, and crime seemed like a distant problem, which happened elsewhere, but never here. South Kingstown was known for its miles of stunning beaches, parks, and quiet streets, lined with homes where families grew together. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other, where kids could roam outside for hours without parents worrying. But beneath that sense of security, something sinister was lurking. May 18, 1975, should have been a day of celebration for Joyce Foreman. It was her 25th birthday, and the day had started like any other. Her sons, Jason and his older brother, had gone outside to play. The sound of their laughter echoed through the trees behind their house. They weren't alone. Other children from the neighborhood had joined in, running through the woods, climbing, shouting, getting lost in the kind of adventures only children could create. Joyce heard them from inside, catching bits of their voices drifting through the open windows. She had no reason to be concerned. This was normal. This was home. At some point in the afternoon, the sounds began to fade. The games had slowed down, and the energy had shifted. Joyce didn't think much of it at the time. She assumed the children had moved on to something else or had gone inside to cool off. It wasn't until Jason's older brother returned home later that day, alone, that the first flicker of fear settled in. Jason should have been with him. He wasn't. At first, there was no panic, just a growing unease. Maybe Jason was still playing. Maybe he'd wandered to a friend's house. But when their calls went unanswered, when every usual hiding spot turned up empty, unease turned to fear. The police intervened, bringing in search dogs and combing every inch of the forest behind the Foreman home. But Jason was gone. Before we continue, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It will help more people hear stories that matter, stories people are too scared to talk about. The theories started quickly. Maybe he had fallen somewhere, hurt and unable to call for help. Maybe he had been taken, but who would do such a thing? This was South Kingstown, a place where children were supposed to be safe. His parents refused to give up. Flyers were printed, news stations covered the case. Leads trickled in, but none led anywhere. It was as if Jason had vanished into thin air. As the world moved on, the Foremans remained trapped in time, waiting for an answer that never came. They kept his room the same, never changing a thing. They waited for the phone call, the letter, and the sighting to bring him home, but none came. Jason Foreman had become another name on a growing list of missing children, a case that slipped further into the background as time went on. And then, 7 years later, a single moment unraveled everything. The houses in South Kingstown sat close together, neighbors always aware of what went on beyond their fences. So when trouble stirred at a home across the street from the Foremans, word spread fast. People whispered about a teenager named Dale Sherman, a paperboy who had barely escaped something horrifying. Dale had been on his usual route, delivering newspapers through the neighborhood. It was routine, nothing out of the ordinary, until a man called out to him. Michael Woodmansee lived right across from the Foremans and had lived there for years. He wasn't a stranger. That day he invited Dale inside, offering him something no 14-year-old would turn down: alcohol. Dale hesitated but stepped through the door. Michael poured himself a drink, then another. The effects hit fast, heavier than they should have. Dale felt his body giving in, exhaustion settling in his bones. His vision blurred. His limbs felt like dead weight. Something was wrong. Before he could react, Michael moved. A strip of cloth tightened around his neck, cutting off his air, pulling him into darkness. Dale fought, his hands clawing, his body twisting, desperate to escape. And somehow he did. In a rush of adrenaline, he broke free, stumbling toward the door, barely making it outside before running full speed toward home. He burst through his front door, gasping, words tumbling between ragged breaths. His father didn't waste time. He didn't hesitate. He marched across the street, pounded on Michael's door, and the second it opened, his fist landed hard against Michael's face. Then as he turned to leave, he spotted a police car parked nearby. He flagged the officers down, told them everything. What happened next defied all logic. Dale and his father recounted the afternoon at the station in shaky, breathless detail. But as police pressed Michael on the attack, something else surfaced. Something far worse. Michael sat across from them, silent, his expression unreadable. Officers took notes, asked questions, and then focused on Michael. They needed to understand why he had attacked Dale and his intentions. But as they dug deeper, a new suspicion began to take shape. Something about Michael's demeanor unsettled them. His responses felt calculated, and his tone was too composed for someone caught in such a violent act. As the interrogation stretched on, officers exchanged glances. They weren't just looking at an attempted assault suspect. There was something more, something worse. One officer shifted the conversation, steering away from Dale and toward a different case. A cold case. 7 years had passed since Jason Foreman vanished, but the memory of that missing boy still haunted the community. Without warning, they slipped his name into the conversation, watching Michael's reaction. And then, the unexpected happened. Instead of shutting down or denying any connection, Michael spoke. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stumble over his words. He simply started talking. And with every sentence, the horror deepened. Michael admitted that he had seen Jason on the day he disappeared. He hadn't just seen him, he had spoken to him. And more than that, Jason had followed him home. Details of that day remain largely undisclosed. Even decades later, investigators have kept much of what they learned private, sparing the Foreman family the full weight of the truth. But the core of it is known. In 1982, police were called to investigate an assault involving a local teenager. The case had nothing to do with Jason, or at least that's what they initially thought. But as officers questioned the suspect, a disturbing truth surfaced. He had done something terrible, far worse than anyone could have imagined. The suspect was Michael Woodmansee, a quiet, unassuming neighbor. He wasn't a stranger. He had lived just down the street from the Foreman family. He had watched the search parties, read the news reports, and lived among the desperate people desperate for answers. All along, he had known the truth because he was the one who had taken Jason. At first, no one wanted to believe it. Woodmansee was just a teenager when Jason disappeared. He wasn't the kind of person anyone would suspect. But as investigators pressed him, the details poured out. He had lured Jason into his home. He had killed him. And then he had done something even worse. He hadn't just hidden the body, he had kept it. When officers searched Woodmansee's home, they found Jason's remains. Woodmansee insisted the journal was just a story. His bones had been coated in shellac, preserved like artifacts. It was as if Woodmansee had wanted to keep a piece of his crime, a trophy of what he had done. For 7 years, the Foreman family had been searching for their son, and all along, his killer had been right there, hiding in plain sight. But when investigators turned the pages, they knew immediately. This was no work of fiction. Jason Foreman vanished without a trace. One moment, he was playing outside. The next, he was gone. His mother thought he couldn't have gone far. He was only 5. But as night fell and he still hadn't come home, worry turned into dread. His parents searched. They called his name. Nothing. They had no choice but to call the police. Officers combed the area, questioned neighbors, and searched the woods. His family clung to hope. Maybe he'd turn up. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But days passed, then years. Jason Foreman was never found. But his parents never stopped waiting. 7 years of silence, 7 years of not knowing. Then in April 1982, everything changed. Jason, a trusting 5-year-old, walked into Michael's home, unaware that he would never leave. Michael was 16 at the time, still just a teenager himself. But he wasn't like other boys his age. His mind harbored thoughts that most people couldn't begin to comprehend. Dark, twisted thoughts that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. That day, May 18th, 1975, those thoughts took form. At some point, Michael retrieved a kitchen knife. What led to that moment remains unclear. What he said to Jason, how he moved, and whether the child had any warning of what was coming are all lost. But what happened next is undeniable. For years, his parents had begged for answers, desperate to know what had become of their son. The community had searched endlessly, hoping to find even a trace of him, but they never did. His disappearance defied logic. There was no trail, no remains, no sign that he had ever existed beyond that one tragic afternoon, until now. As Michael sat in that interrogation room, his words began to unravel the mystery. But they didn't bring relief. They didn't bring closure. They revealed something far worse. As soon as Michael finished his confession, panic flickered across his face. He shifted in his seat, hesitated, and then mentioned something that made the officers lean in. He had a journal, a notebook, a record of sorts, hidden away in his room. But before they could press him for details, he hurried to explain. Whatever was written inside it wasn't real, just fiction, just stories. Nothing more. Except when investigators found the book, they knew immediately this wasn't fiction. Inside, page after page, details of what had happened to Jason Foreman are provided. Not vague recollections, not scattered thoughts. A full account, a step-by-step chronicle of that nightmarish day. The public never got to see what was written. Law enforcement kept the contents sealed, refusing to release a single sentence. But Jason's sister, Raven, learned the truth. She sat with investigators as they explained what they had found, and what they told her was beyond comprehension. This journal wasn't just a retelling of Jason's final moments. It was something else, something worse, a cookbook. Michael had done more than take Jason's life. He had gone further, past any boundary of human morality. He had prepared Jason like a meal. Why? No one could say. Michael never explained, never expressed remorse. But the horror didn't end there. When Jason was gone, and nothing was left but bone, Michael ensured those bones wouldn't be lost or discarded. He cleaned them, preserved them, and then he put them on display. Some reports suggest the bones sat out in the open, arranged like decorations. Others claim they were sealed inside a box, carefully stored away. Either way, the truth was undeniable. For 7 years, while a family grieved, while a town searched, while hope faded, Michael had been living just across the street, keeping his terrible secret in plain sight. Investigators had everything they needed: the confession, the journal, and the evidence. A conviction should have been guaranteed, but the case was far from over. The Foreman family had already suffered beyond measure. They had spent years trapped in uncertainty, praying for an answer they were never prepared to receive. And now, as prosecutors prepared to take the case to trial, a new question arose. Can they sit through it? Would they be able to listen as every gruesome detail was laid bare in court? Or would it break them completely? The justice system had a choice: put Michael Woodmansee on trial for first-degree murder and force Jason's family to relive their worst nightmare in court, or offer an alternative, one that spared them the gruesome details and the sight of their son's remains being presented as evidence. Jason's father was given a deal. If he agreed to let prosecutors pursue a conviction of second-degree murder instead, Michael would still go to prison for 40 years. It wouldn't be a life sentence, but it would mean the family wouldn't have to hear every horrific detail read aloud in a courtroom. They wouldn't have to see the journal. They wouldn't have to sit through testimony about what had been done to their son. It wasn't justice, not really, but it was mercy, for the family at least. Jason's father agreed. The trial was avoided, and Michael was sent away. But the nightmare didn't end. The town of South Kingstown wasn't satisfied with a plea deal. People wanted to see Michael pay, truly pay, for what he had done. He had stolen a child, destroyed a family, and turned their grief into something even darker. A prison sentence wasn't enough. People wanted revenge. Michael was moved to a facility in Massachusetts for his safety. Even behind bars, he wasn't safe in Rhode Island. His crime was too monstrous, and his name was too well known. But Rhode Island law still applied, and that's where things went wrong. The state had a good time law. It allowed prisoners to reduce their sentences by showing good behavior. For every month served without incident, 10 days were shaved off. Over time, this added up. It meant that a long sentence could be shortened by years, sometimes by more than a decade. Michael played the system perfectly. He followed every rule, kept his head down, did nothing to draw attention to himself. And because of that, he didn't serve the full 40 years. He didn't even serve 30. After just 28 years, Michael Woodmansee was scheduled for release. When the news broke, the town exploded. People weren't just angry, they were preparing. Some openly admitted to buying weapons, not for protection, but for something else. They weren't waiting for Michael to make another move. They were planning to end things themselves. Jason's father was one of them. He didn't try to hide it, he said it plainly. If Michael ever stepped foot back into town, he wouldn't live to see another day. But it wasn't just anger driving him, it was guilt. Jason's father regretted taking the plea deal. If he had known about the good time law, he never would have agreed to it. He believed he had condemned someone else's child by choosing the easier path for his family. If Michael got out and did it again, that blood would be on his hands. And that wasn't something he could live with. But Michael never returned to South Kingstown. He never got the chance. He knew what would happen if he went back. He knew the town was waiting. So instead of walking free, he accepted an alternative that kept him out of reach. Instead of going home, he was placed in a mental health facility. That's where he remains. He's in his 60s now, living out his days under psychiatric care. No one can say whether true remorse or simple self-preservation keeps him there. But one thing is certain, the town never forgot, and they never forgave. The anger didn't fade, it only grew. The streets of Rhode Island were filled with protests, voices demanding justice that had never come. People weren't just outraged, they wanted Michael gone for good. If the system wouldn't take care of him, they would. Michael knew he had no future outside those walls. There would be no fresh start, no second chance. The moment he stepped back into the world, it would not be waiting for him with open arms. He stayed behind locked doors instead of facing that reality, but not in prison. He now resides at Eleanor Slater Hospital in Cranston, Rhode Island, a long-term psychiatric facility. He will likely never leave, but for some, that's not enough. Jason's father, John Foreman, never let go of his promise. He swore he would find Michael, no matter how long it took. He swore he would make sure Michael never had the chance to hurt anyone again, and those close to him believe him. Michael chose a life behind locked doors, but whether it was out of remorse or self-preservation, no one knows. That's the story. No neat ending, no justice that feels right. Just the reality of a crime that left scars too deep to heal. Justice failed, but the town never let go of its anger. And if this case shook you to your core, imagine how deep the truth goes. What do you think happened that night? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into cases that will leave you speechless, hit that subscribe button, because the next story might be even darker.